Imagine you wake up in the middle of a pitch-black night. But this is not the peaceful darkness of your bedroom. This is the suffocating darkness of a mud hut filled with the stench of smoke, human waste, and rotting straw. Your teeth are already starting to rot even though you are only 15 years old. Your stomach burns with a hunger that never truly goes away. Outside in the forest, wolves howl through the cold air, and somewhere in the village, a woman screams while giving birth on a dirt floor with no doctor, no medicine, and almost no chance of surviving till sunrise. This was not a nightmare. This was medieval Europe, where most people lived in conditions worse than hell. Welcome to the darkest place on earth. But the real horror has not even begun yet, because what you are about to hear is not even the worst part. The true terror is only starting. My name does not matter. In the year 1347, in the tiny village that today would sit somewhere outside Paris, names had no value. We were only bodies born to work, born to suffer, born to pray, and born to die young. I was 14 years old when I first realized that God had cursed us to live in this age. Or maybe the devil was winning. It was autumn, and the wind carried the smell of rot from the fields, where the final harvest had already failed. My father was only 32 years old, but looked like a man in his 50s, coughing blood onto piles of straw, while my mother tried to feed my little sister a thin soup made from moldy barley. That night, while rats ran across our feet as we tried to sleep, I heard a rumor for the first time from a wandering monk. He said a terrible darkness was coming from the east, ships arriving, filled with nothing but corpses, and a sickness so deadly it was wiping entire cities off the map. But what I did not know was that the plague would almost seem merciful, because our daily lives already felt like torture. Wake up before sunrise. No alarm clock, only church bells, and the constant pain buried deep inside your bones. As a peasant boy, your first job every morning was to empty the family waste bucket or clean the pit in the ground that overflowed into the streets, where children played and animals relieved themselves openly. People said you got used to the smell, but the truth is you never did. Cleanliness was considered a luxury for the rich. Most people barely even washed their hands. Bathing your whole body was almost impossible, and even when people bathed, they used rivers that were treated like open sewers. Lice, fleas, and bedbugs were your permanent companions, biting your skin all night while your entire family slept together on thin straw mattresses. Sometimes even goats slept beside you just to provide a little warmth. Your teeth turned black and rotten before you reached 20 years old. Sugar was rare, but stones and dirt mixed into bread slowly destroyed your teeth. Infections and abscesses were everywhere. There were no dentists, only blacksmiths who ripped teeth out with metal tongs when the pain became unbearable. And the only thing they gave you for relief was a mouthful of weak alcohol. Childbirth was almost a death sentence. Women gave birth on dirt floors while village women stood around praying. There were no trained midwives, no medicine, only blood, tears, and screams. 1 out of every 3 or 4 women died during childbirth, and many babies never survived their first week. If you reached adulthood, you were already considered lucky, because the average life expectancy was barely 30 years. Food was not eaten for pleasure. It was eaten simply to stay alive. A good meal meant black bread, watery vegetable soup, and maybe a little salted pork. If fortune smiled on you, fresh meat was seen only during festivals, or if someone dared to steal a deer from the king's forest. And if they were caught, they could expect the gallows. Milk spoiled quickly, water was filthy and filled with disease. So even children drank weak alcohol because it was safer than water. But malnutrition was everywhere. Scurvy, rickets, and anemia spread through villages. And when crops failed, which happened often, famine followed. People ate grass, they ate tree bark, and during the worst years, people even began eating each other. During the Great Famine, starving families dug up graves and fed on the dead. But hunger was only the beginning. I believed hunger and filth were the worst things life could offer, until the day a stranger arrived at the village gate. Black boils covered his body beneath his arms, and he coughed blood onto the ground. There was a terror in his eyes so deep it could shake your soul. What happened after that turned our entire village into a graveyard, and revealed an even darker evil hiding behind the walls of churches and castles. Before watching the rest of the video, please be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. As the sun disappeared behind the hills and the sky turned blood red and exhausted, strangers stumbled through our village gate. He was a merchant from the south. His clothes were ripped apart and horrible black. Swellings covered his armpits and groin, thick blood and pus dripping. From them, he coughed violently and whispered, "Water, God have mercy," before collapsing onto the dirt. Within hours, the men who carried him inside were burning with fever, and by morning, screams echoed across the entire village. That was the moment we realized true hell was not hunger or poverty, but the invisible death that arrived with rats and fleas. People called it the Black Death, the Great Plague, and the Great Mortality. It was said to have come from the east, carried by ships filled with dead sailors, stacked like rotten cargo. No one understood germs, disease, or the fleas feeding on infected rats, so everyone believed it was God's punishment. The village priest warned that our sins had brought this curse upon us, but prayers could not stop the dying. Slowly, every home filled with fever, coughing, and the silence of death. The first person in my family to fall sick was my little sister Marie. She was only 7 years old. By midnight, her body burned with fever, and a huge swollen lump appeared beneath her neck. My mother tried every remedy she knew, rubbing herbs onto her skin, draining blood from her body, and whispering desperate prayers, but nothing worked. On the third day, Marie died, dark spots spreading across her tiny body. The villagers called them the marks of death. Soon my father became sick too, coughing blood and asking God what terrible sin we had committed to deserve such horror. There were no real doctors in our village, only a traveling barber surgeon and old women with dangerous cures. People sliced open the swellings with filthy knives, drained blood from weak bodies, and covered wounds with strange mixtures of herbs and animal fat. Others trusted charms, magic, and superstitions. The rich fled into the countryside while poor peasants had nowhere to escape. Slowly, humanity itself began to break apart. Families abandoned one another. Children wandered the streets crying for parents already dead inside their homes. And our village became a ghost town, filled with the smell of death. Soon fear turned into madness. Groups of flagellants marched from village to village, whipping themselves until blood covered their backs while begging God for mercy. Terrified villagers joined them, hoping suffering would save their souls. But the disease only spread faster than people searched for someone to blame. Jews, beggars, and the poor were attacked, driven away, or murdered during the night. The sound of coughing, crying, and distant wolves echoed through the darkness while rats crawled openly through our huts. My mother cared for the sick until black swellings appeared on her own body. Before dying, she grabbed my hand and whispered, "If you survive, tell the world what kind of hell we lived through." And by sunrise, she was gone. Within a few months, the Black Death wiped out nearly half of Europe. Entire villages vanished, graveyards overflowed, and bodies were thrown into massive pits without prayers or coffins. The stench of rotting flesh and burning fires poisoned the air everywhere. I buried my mother, father, and sister with my own hands, and every single day I wondered if I would be next. But surviving the first wave of death was only the beginning, because hunger, bandits, greedy lords, and human cruelty would soon become even more terrifying than the plague itself.